In the dim quiet of a Petersburg night, where the lamps glowed faintly against the fog, and the cobblestones held the weary echoes of footsteps, one truth whispered endlessly through Dostoevsky's pages: that suffering is the root of consciousness. It was not the cry of pain alone, nor the heavy shadow of despair, but something deeper, a strange music in the ache of human existence. To listen to Dostoevsky is to hear this whisper, soft but insistent, as though every heart is drawn toward it. In the stillness, he understood suffering not as an accident, not as a wound to be erased, but as a central law of being. We might imagine him sitting at his desk, trembling hands pushing ink across paper, having lived prisons and debts, gambling halls and death sentences. To him, suffering was not a theory. It was the air he breathed, the punishment he survived, the fire that burned through his bones, and yet out of that fire he found a strange illumination. It is this paradox, that the darkest agony can be the first spark of wisdom, that forms the opening door into his philosophy. When we suffer, Dostoevsky tells us, we awaken. Pain breaks the shell of indifference and forces us to see. Think of Raskolnikov wandering through feverish streets, the guilt of murder pressing on his soul like a heavy chain. His suffering is unbearable, but without it, he would never truly awaken to compassion, never fall at Sonia's feet and whisper words of broken confession. Or think of Prince Mishkin, whose very epilepsy, terrible as it is, becomes a window into transcendence, a fleeting moment of unbearable light that cracks open the ordinary world. In these figures, Dostoevsky shows us that suffering is not meaningless torment. It is the threshold to understanding, but suffering is never noble on its own. To romanticize pain, to seek it out, would be a mistake. Dostoevsky's vision is subtler. He shows us that it is only through the resistance of the human heart against its own agony that meaning is born. If we are crushed by it, nothing comes. If we numb ourselves, we lose the gift. But if we endure it, if we let it deepen our sense of others, if we learn humility through it, then suffering becomes a passageway. In silence, it whispers, "You are alive." And so is everyone else who bleeds as you bleed. He knew that to live is to carry wounds, visible or hidden. Yet he also knew that within every wound is the possibility of transformation. That is why his characters stumble, fall, and break apart, only to rise trembling into moments of grace. It is not easy, not gentle. Dostoevsky does not lull us with the promise of quick redemption. Instead, he teaches that suffering stretches across years, that it can hollow out the soul, but that in the hollowing something eternal might be planted. To listen to him is to let yourself drift into that deeper rhythm. Imagine yourself lying still in a quiet room, hearing the muted wind outside, and then hearing another sound, quieter still, the whisper of suffering that belongs not only to you, but to every soul that ever lived. Dostoevsky asks us to lean into it not with fear, but with a kind of reverence. For in that whisper lies the beginning of wisdom. When his characters cry out, when they tremble on the edge of despair, they do not remain there forever. They are forced to ask, "Why must I suffer?" And Dostoevsky answers, "Because only through it can you see your own depth, and only through it can you recognize another's humanity." The underground man, full of bile and mockery, still admits that his toothache, his wretched humiliation, gives him a perverse kind of knowledge. Even in degradation, there is a twisted awareness that no comfort could provide. We begin here with suffering as the seed. It is the darkest soil, and yet from it grows the strange flower of Dostoevsky's thought. You may not want to linger with it. The mind seeks escape, the body seeks relief. But if you rest in his world, slowly, gently, as if falling toward sleep, You will find that he does not lead you into despair for its own sake. He leads you into the heart of suffering so that you might see its secret light. And so, the whisper continues. As you drift between waking and dreaming, it tells you your pain is not meaningless. It can open your eyes. It can draw you closer to the truth that lies hidden in every soul. If you can endure its weight, if you can walk through its night, you may discover that suffering is not the enemy, but the first teacher, the voice that calls you into the darkest wisdom. There is a room beneath the city, small and dim, with damp walls and a single flickering candle. In it lives the voice of one of Dostoevsky's strangest creations, the underground man. He is bitter, full of spite, gnawing at himself as though his mind were a wound that will never close. And yet, hidden in his muttering, in his confession that is half self-torture and half mockery, lies a secret so vital that Dostoevsky placed it at the very threshold of modern thought. The secret is this, that man does not want to be rational. Man does not want to be governed only by logic, by what is useful, by the neat and polished order of society. Even if all the mathematicians and philosophers should prove that 2 and 2 make 4, man will still sometimes cry out, "I want it. To be 5 simply because I will it." This, says the underground man, is the essence of freedom, that stubborn, unreasonable refusal to be reduced to a machine. Imagine the world he despises, a utopia of comfort, where every appetite is satisfied, where every human act can be predicted, measured and calculated. To most it sounds like paradise, but to the underground man, it is hell. He sees that in such a world there would be no dignity, no mystery, no self left. Life would be reduced to a problem already solved. And so he insists in his shrill, almost comical rage that he would rather smash a beautiful crystal palace than live inside it. For what matters most to him is not happiness, but freedom, the freedom even to destroy, even to choose what harms himself. Here lies the unsettling wisdom. Man is not simply rational, not simply a creature of self-interest. He is deeper, stranger, more contradictory. He is capable of spitting on his own well-being, simply to prove that he is not a puppet. Dostoevsky's secret is that within each of us there is an underground man whispering rebellion against the smooth machinery of reason. It is uncomfortable to admit, for it means that progress alone will never satisfy us, that no society of perfect equality or prosperity will ever quiet the human heart. Always, in its depths, will remain that irrational. Cry, "I want my freedom, even if it destroys me." To hear this cry at night, as you drift between thought and dream, is to glimpse the shadow within yourself. The underground man is not someone else. He is the voice that rises when you feel trapped, when you resist what is expected, when you say no for no other reason than to feel your will alive. He is humiliating, yes, and often ridiculous, but he carries a hard truth. The human spirit is not designed for perfect harmony. It needs resistance, conflict, the sharp edge of choice. Dostoevsky shows us this not to make us despair, but to free us from illusions. He warns us that no paradise engineered by reason can erase the wildness within. And perhaps this is not a curse, but a gift. For in that defiance, in that refusal to bow completely to calculation, lies the seed of individuality. It is what makes each soul unrepeatable, what keeps life from becoming mechanical. The underground man suffers for his knowledge. His defiance isolates him. His spite turns back upon himself, and he becomes his own tormentor. Yet, in his suffering, he reveals something crucial about being human, that we are creatures not only of reason, not only of comfort, but of mystery. And perhaps, Dostoevsky whispers, it is this mystery that makes us truly alive. As you listen to him in the stillness, you may feel his voice as both a warning and a lullaby. He tells you that freedom is heavier than happiness, that the soul resists all cages, even golden ones. His secret is not soothing, but it is honest. You are not a machine. You cannot be calculated, and that is both your burden and your dignity. So let the candle of his underground room flicker in your imagination. Hear his muttering, sharp and bitter, and then let it soften as you understand. He is not merely ranting, he is guarding something fragile, something fierce. The freedom to be more than reason, more than comfort, more than a predictable equation. That freedom is the secret that he protects, even as it breaks him. And if you close your eyes now, you may feel it too, that restless whisper within you, that refusal to be tamed. It is not always pleasant, but it is part of the darkest wisdom, that man does not live by reason alone, and that in the depths of the underground, freedom burns even in the shadows. Faith, for Dostoevsky, was never a matter of easy comfort. It was not the clear sunlight of certainty, but the trembling flame that burns in the deepest shadows. He had known too much darkness, too much cruelty and despair, to pretend that belief was simple. Instead, he placed his faith in the same place he placed his characters, in the pit of suffering, in the chaos of doubt, where the light seemed most fragile. And yet it was there, against all odds, that his faith shone brightest. Imagine the silence of a Siberian prison camp, the frost heavy on the air, the chains pressing against the body. In such a place, most men would lose all hope, all trust in God. But Dostoevsky, condemned and humiliated, stripped of all illusions, found within that silence a seed of faith. Not the faith of triumph, not the faith of worldly blessing, but a faith that clings even when everything is lost. It was the faith of Job, the faith that does not explain suffering away, but dares to endure it with trembling hope. This is the faith that lives in his novels. It is the faith of Sonia, the poor prostitute who holds a worn copy of the Gospels and reads to Raskolnikov of Lazarus rising from the tomb. She has no power, no beauty left by the standards of the world, no security in her life, and yet she believes. She believes not because her life is free of pain, but because she has walked through pain and discovered that only in the name of Christ does her soul find rest. In her brokenness lies the secret of faith, that it is not built upon strength, but upon surrender. Dostoevsky's faith is always trembling, always in dialogue with despair. He does not hide the darkness of doubt. Ivan Karamazov, perhaps the most haunting of his creations, voices it plainly. How can one believe in a God who permits the suffering of children, even lays down his rebellion with clarity and fire? And Dostoevsky does not silence him. He lets the rebellion stand, lets the question burn unanswered. And yet, against that backdrop, stands Alyosha, quiet, compassionate, not with arguments, but with presence. His faith is not a refutation of Ivan, but a response of love. He chooses to live as though God's love is real, even when the darkness seems overwhelming. Here lies the essence of Dostoevsky's philosophy of faith. It cannot be proven, it cannot be forced, it cannot be reduced to reason. It is a leap, a trembling step into the shadows, holding on to the whisper of grace, and in that step, something extraordinary happens. The darkness itself becomes the place where light is revealed. Faith, for Dostoevsky, is not about escaping the night, but about carrying a candle within it. As you let these thoughts drift across your mind, you may feel the tension between doubt and belief within yourself. Perhaps you too have heard Ivan's question, felt the unbearable weight of a world filled with suffering. And perhaps you have also glimpsed in quiet moments a gentler presence, like Alyosha's, that does not argue but comforts, that does not explain but loves. Dostoevsky's wisdom is that both voices belong to the same human heart, and that true faith does not silence doubt, but lives alongside it. To fall asleep with his words is to let this paradox rest inside you, that faith is strongest not when it is unchallenged, but when it endures in the shadows. It does not need certainty to survive. It needs only the smallest spark of hope, the courage to believe that love is real even when the night seems endless. And so his stories whisper, do not wait for perfect light. Do not demand that every question be answered before you believe. Instead, let your faith be like a fragile flame flickering in the wind, yet somehow unextinguished. That is the kind of faith Dostoevsky offers, not triumphant, not easy, but real. Close your eyes and imagine that candle burning. Around it, the shadows deepen, but the flame remains. It trembles, it bends, but it does not vanish. This is faith. In the shadows, a quiet defiance of despair, a fragile light that refuses to die, and perhaps the truest wisdom Dostoevsky ever knew. Freedom, Dostoevsky tells us, is not the light, easy gift that most imagine. It is a weight, a burden that presses on the soul as heavily as any chain. To live freely is to bear the full consequences of one's choices, to confront the vast expanse of possibility, and to recognize that each decision can shape the course of a life and of lives around us. It is the knowledge that no one else can truly live for you, that no law, no promise, no order can substitute for the courage to choose. Consider Raskolnikov once more, pacing the narrow streets of Petersburg. The city is alive with night sounds. Distant shouts, the creak of wagon wheels, the clatter of horses' hooves on stone. Every step mirrors the tumult within him. He has made a choice, the most terrible, unthinkable choice, and now he must live with it. Here is freedom in its purest form, the freedom to act without guidance, without divine veto, without certainty. The weight of that freedom crushes him, yet also awakens a kind of understanding. He learns, painfully, that to be human is to choose, even at the risk of ruin. Dostoevsky's philosophy insists that freedom is inseparable from responsibility. To exist without the weight of choice is to exist without the depth of life. A man who never chooses, who merely follows the currents of society or the dictates of reason, may live comfortably, but he does not live fully. He does not feel the trembling thrill of life's danger, nor the sobering gravity of moral consequence. Freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying because it carries the full spectrum of human possibility, the potential for greatness, for evil, for love, for despair. In The Underground Man, this tension is laid bare. He rails against society, against expectations, against reason itself. Yet he is trapped by his own inertia and indecision. He craves freedom but recoils from its demands, demonstrating a profound truth. Freedom is not always welcome. It requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to confront oneself without excuses. And in confronting oneself, one may discover the true measure of a soul. Dostoevsky shows us that freedom is often painful because it exposes our weaknesses. To choose is to confront the shadow within, to see desires that frighten us, to acknowledge impulses we would rather deny. And yet in that confrontation there is a strange liberation. The very weight of freedom teaches us the value of every moment, the gravity of every act. Even the most ordinary decisions, a word spoken, a hand extended, a refusal given, resonate with moral significance because they emerge from the full depth of human will. Let yourself imagine this as you drift into quiet reflection. Picture the streets, the dim lamps, the endless possibilities stretching like a river before you. Each choice, each path is heavy with consequence. To walk freely is to walk alone with this weight, to acknowledge it, and still to step forward. That is the kind of courage Dostoevsky admires. It is not the absence of fear, but the conscious decision to carry fear and act anyway. Freedom, therefore, is both blessing and trial. It awakens the conscience, sharpens perception, and reveals the soul's true desires. But it also exposes folly, selfishness, and moral failure. It does not shelter, it does not comfort, it challenges. Yet through that challenge comes wisdom, the recognition that life is not a series of rules to obey, but a series of choices to endure, navigate, and accept. And so, as you close your eyes, let the weight of freedom settle around you like a soft, heavy cloak. Feel its pressure, its insistence, its quiet insistence that you are alive, that you are responsible, that you are capable of both error and redemption. It is neither cruel nor kind. It simply is. And in its weight lies the heart of Dostoevsky's philosophy, the knowledge that to live freely is to live truly, however frightening or demanding that truth may be. In the quiet, feel the tension of choice, the tremor of possibility. Let it wash over you like a tide, teaching patience, humility, and courage. Freedom is no light burden, but it is a gift that illuminates the soul, revealing the dark contours and hidden depths that only conscious, deliberate living can expose. In this knowledge, even the heaviest weight can become a kind of solace, a testament to the depth of life itself. Conscience, Dostoevsky reveals, is not a gentle voice that merely whispers guidance. It is a relentless presence, an unyielding force that shadows every choice, every thought, every desire. It is capable of tormenting as much as it instructs, and for those who seek to escape it, there is no sanctuary. To violate conscience is to commit a crime against the self, a crime whose punishment comes not from law or society, but from within. Raskolnikov exemplifies this truth in the most extreme form. The murder he believes to be justified, an act calculated in cold reason, designed to serve a higher purpose, becomes a mirror of his soul. The act itself, though outwardly completed, cannot remain isolated from the inner life. From the moment the deed is done, his conscience begins its work. It gnaws, it torments, it exposes the hidden layers of pride, arrogance, and fear that he cannot escape. And through this relentless pressure, he confronts the terrible realization: crime against others is inseparable from crime against oneself. Dostoevsky teaches that conscience is not merely moral instruction. It is a lens through which we see ourselves. The agony that follows a wrong action is not punishment imposed by God alone. It is the soul's own recognition of its imperfection. And this recognition is both unbearable and necessary, for without it, we cannot awaken to moral truth. The guilty soul, in its unrest, comes closer to understanding life than the comfortable man who has never faced his own shadow. Consider also Ivan Karamazov, whose philosophical rebellion is a crime against conscience of another kind. He refuses to reconcile suffering with the existence of God, and yet he cannot escape the moral truths his intellect unveils. Even in denial, even in argument, his conscience haunts him, presenting the faces of the innocent and the cries of the afflicted. The crime of conscience is subtler than Raskolnikov's. It is an inner rupture, a refusal to submit, yet a recognition that one cannot entirely dismiss the moral weight pressing down from within. Dostoevsky's vision extends this idea into every human life. We do not need to commit murder to feel its effects. Every dishonesty, every act of selfishness, every avoidance of responsibility stirs the conscience. And the whisper begins, quiet at first, then louder. You know better. You could have chosen otherwise. Conscience, in its relentless way, demands awareness, reflection, and eventually action. To ignore it is to court inner collapse, while to engage with it is to embark on the path toward redemption. There is a strange beauty in this terror. As you listen to Dostoevsky's voice in the stillness, you realize that the weight of conscience, as oppressive as it may feel, shapes the human spirit. It is the mechanism by which we awaken to empathy, to understanding, to the necessity of love and humility. Without the burden of conscience, man drifts like a leaf on the wind, untethered and untested. With it, even in anguish, he becomes capable of growth, capable of self-awareness, capable of grasping the threads that bind all lives together. To imagine this, let your mind drift along Raskolnikov's fevered steps, along Ivan's restless nights. Hear the unspoken whispers that rise from within, the recollection of a wrong word, the imagined glance of someone you have hurt, the tremor of guilt that will not leave. These are the invisible chains Dostoevsky places upon us, not to imprison, but to awaken. The crime of conscience is the teacher of humanity, its insistence that we confront ourselves fully, that we bear witness to our own contradictions, and that we never forget the weight of what we do. And as you sink further into quiet reflection, recognize the subtle truth. Conscience is not a burden to flee, but a guide to follow, however harshly it leads. Its whispers, persistent and uncomfortable, illuminate the path toward wisdom, toward empathy, toward redemption. To fall asleep with this understanding is to cradle the mind in the acknowledgement of human imperfection, yet to rest in the hope that every awakening brings the possibility of making amends, not for others alone, but for the self. In the end, Dostoevsky's philosophy of conscience is a philosophy of vigilance, an eternal reminder that the soul cannot be deceived, that inner crime is never hidden, and that the path toward moral clarity is illuminated only through facing the darkness within. Love, Dostoevsky suggests, is never simple, never soft, never merely comforting. It is a force that tears open the soul, exposes vulnerability, and drags the heart into an abyss where pain and beauty coexist. To love deeply is to risk suffering, to confront the contradictions of human desire, and to witness both the nobility and the darkness in others. In his novels, love is never a gentle balm. It is a crucible in which souls are tested and revealed. Consider Raskolnikov and Sonia, whose relationship is both tender and torturous. She loves him with unwavering devotion even as he rejects, resents, and wounds her. He is proud, conflicted, and broken, yet in the quiet moments with her, he glimpses a love that transcends selfishness and reason. Dostoevsky presents this love, not as sentimental sweetness, but as a mirror held to the human heart. Through love, we confront our own failings, our capacity for cruelty, and our desperate longing for grace. Love demands confrontation with one's own darkness. Prince Mishkin, the innocent idiot, enters the lives of others with pure compassion, yet even he cannot escape the chaos that human passion brings. Love exposes the complexity of desire, the tangle of jealousy, pride, and fear, and the paradox that the one we cherish most can be both our salvation and our torment. Dostoevsky teaches that to engage fully in love is to accept the possibility of heartbreak, betrayal, and suffering, because the heart cannot be contained, and human beings are never entirely predictable or rational. Yet in this abyss, there is illumination. Love strips away pretenses, revealing the raw and fragile truth of our existence. It is a teacher, showing us the edges of our endurance, the depths of our empathy, and the resilience of the human spirit. Through love, we learn to suffer not only for ourselves but for others, to extend mercy, patience, and forgiveness, even when it is undeserved. It is in this extension of the self that Dostoevsky locates redemption, the small but persistent light that can shine even in the darkest corners of the soul. Dostoevsky also shows that love is entwined with moral responsibility. To love someone truly is to see them fully, to witness their flaws, and to remain present despite them. It is never an abstraction, never a fleeting emotion. It is a commitment that tests courage, humility, and compassion. When Raskolnikov finally kneels before Sonia, confessing his guilt, it is not merely the act of a man seeking absolution. It is the recognition that love requires honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to face the consequences of one's actions. In love, there is no easy solace. It is a realm where the soul is exposed to its own capacity for both good and evil, where joy is inseparable from sorrow, and where the hope of connection exists side by side with the risk of despair. Dostoevsky's insight is that only those who dare to enter this abyss can truly understand themselves and others. To love is to confront the fragility and brilliance of human existence in its purest form. Imagine lying quietly, eyes closed, feeling the subtle pull of affection, the tender ache of longing, the silent whisper of concern for another. In that stillness, recognize the dual nature of love. It can lift and destroy, heal and wound, illuminate and blind. Yet, it is precisely this duality that grants it its profound power, its ability to teach, transform, and reveal the depths of the human heart. As you drift toward sleep, let Dostoevsky's vision of love settle softly around you. Understand that to love is to step willingly into uncertainty, to embrace vulnerability, and to allow another's life to intertwine with your own. In that intertwining, in the trembling, terrifying intimacy, lies the abyss, and within it, the faint, enduring glow of wisdom. Love is never gentle, yet it is essential. It confronts, it challenges, it demands everything and offers everything in return. To listen to its lessons is to engage with the profoundest truths of existence, and, in the quiet embrace of this understanding, the heart can find both rest and awakening. One of the most haunting truths in Dostoevsky's work is the silence of God. It is not the absence of divinity, but the profound quiet that accompanies human suffering, the moments when prayer seems to dissolve into empty air and the world offers no comfort, no explanation. This silence is neither punishment nor oversight. It is the canvas upon which human freedom, moral struggle, and the search for meaning are painted. Ivan Karamazov articulates it most sharply. He cannot reconcile the innocence of suffering children with the existence of a loving God. The question burns within him, relentless and unanswerable. Why do the innocent endure pain, while the guilty sometimes prosper? In his rebellion, Ivan represents the raw confrontation with divine silence, the anguish of a mind unwilling to accept easy answers. Dostoevsky does not chastise him. He allows the tension to remain unresolved, showing that faith and doubt often coexist in the human heart. Yet within this silence, Dostoevsky finds space for contemplation, for reflection, for profound moral awakening. The absence of immediate answers forces his characters, and through them, his readers, to confront themselves, their own responsibilities, and the limits of human comprehension. When God does not speak, the soul must speak, must wrestle with conscience, and must engage in the act of moral and spiritual discernment without external assurances. It is a trial of inner fortitude, a test of the depth of one's humanity. Consider the suffering that saturates the lives of his characters. Raskolnikov's guilt, the torment of the underground man, the quiet endurance of Sonia, all of it occurs under the shadow of unanswered questions. The silence of God amplifies their struggle, exposing the raw nerve of existence. Yet it is in this very silence that the possibility for awakening arises. Without preordained answers, the human spirit must become active, deliberate, and engaged. We must seek goodness, mercy, and understanding, not because they are rewarded, but because they are necessary for our own moral survival. Dostoevsky suggests that the silence of God is intimately connected to freedom. If divine will were always clear, If justice and morality were guaranteed and enforced from above, human choice would diminish. The absence of clear instruction, the refusal of easy consolation, forces the soul to act with deliberate courage. Every moral decision, every act of empathy, every gesture of love becomes more precious precisely because it is uncoerced. It is the weight of responsibility that gives life its depth, the emptiness that allows virtue to emerge. Imagine this silence, surrounding you as you lie still, drifting between thought and sleep. Hear it not as emptiness, but as space, a void that demands your engagement, your reflection, your vigilance. In it, every whisper of conscience, every tug of empathy, every subtle recognition of another's suffering becomes luminous, significant, and alive. The silence is not absence. It is the arena in which the human spirit meets its own challenge and discovers its capacity for courage, compassion, and endurance. Even in the silence, Dostoevsky offers hints of hope. Sonia's quiet prayers, the selfless acts of goodness, and the small gestures of mercy suggest that the divine may speak not in thunder, but in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Through human hearts acting rightly in the midst of uncertainty. Faith, therefore, is not blind acquiescence but active engagement, a conscious decision to act as though goodness matters even when the universe remains mute. And so, as you rest in the quiet, allow this truth to settle gently. The silence of God does not demand despair, it demands presence. It asks that we awaken to the depth of our own responsibility, that we meet suffering with courage, and that we choose goodness not for reward, but for the sake of our own souls and the fragile light of humanity. In this stillness, in the absence of answers, there is space for reflection, for growth, and for the slow, luminous emergence of wisdom. Dostoevsky's silence is not emptiness. It is a challenge, a crucible, and ultimately a kind of guidance. To dwell within it is to confront the deepest questions, to witness the rawness of human existence, and to discover the faint, enduring glow of moral clarity that can shine even in the absence of certainty. Guilt, Dostoevsky shows us, is not merely a fleeting emotion. It is a persistent companion, one that follows the soul into the quietest corners, even into dreams. The guilty mind does not rest. It wanders through shadows, retracing deeds, imagining consequences, and replaying moments that can never be undone. Sleep does not always provide refuge. For those who carry moral weight, it becomes a landscape where conscience is both judge and executioner. Raskolnikov's nights are filled with such dreams. The murder he believed justified returns to him in grotesque forms. The faces of the innocent he has harmed, the weight of society's invisible judgment, and the unceasing echo of his own inner condemnation. These dreams are not mere nightmares. They are the language of conscience made tangible, the body's reflection of a mind racked with moral turbulence. In Dostoevsky's universe, guilt cannot be escaped through reason or distraction. It must be confronted, acknowledged, and endured. Yet, there is something instructive, even illuminating in these dreams. They force the guilty soul to examine itself, to see the fractures in its reasoning, the arrogance that led to harm, and the deep interconnection of all human lives. Dreams of guilt are mirrors that reveal not only the crime, but the hidden layers of the self, the pride, the weakness, and the fear that made the act possible. In this nocturnal theater, the mind becomes its own confessor, interrogator, and witness. Consider the broader implications. Dostoevsky's philosophy suggests that guilt is not an anomaly reserved for criminals or the morally extreme. It is intrinsic to human life. Every failure to act with compassion, every selfish impulse, every lie, even the smallest one, carries its echo These echoes enter our dreams, reminding us that moral life is not optional, that conscience does not rest, and that the soul's reckoning is continuous, subtle, and unrelenting. The dreams of the guilty soul are also a bridge to redemption. In them, the individual is confronted with the consequences of actions, not to punish, but to awaken insight. Through the relentless reflection that guilt brings, there emerges a possibility, the possibility to understand, to repent, and to act differently. Dostoevsky's characters often find themselves at the threshold of transformation in these dream states, realizing that only by facing the darkness within can they approach even the faintest light of moral clarity. Even in these nocturnal confrontations, there is an intimate meditation on human empathy. To dream of guilt is to recognize the suffering of others, to imagine their pain as vividly as one's own. It is a call to moral awareness, a reminder that the self cannot exist in isolation. We are bound, willingly or not, to each other, and the guilty soul learns that its acts ripple outward, touching lives in ways that reason alone cannot always measure. As you drift in quiet reflection, let these ideas settle softly. Picture the shadowed mind wandering through the dreamscape of conscience, retracing choices, seeing faces of those affected, and confronting the hidden motives that shape action. In this landscape, there is no judgment from others, only the relentless, compassionate scrutiny of the self. It is uncomfortable, yet necessary. It is in these dreams that the seed of understanding begins to grow. Dostoevsky teaches that the guilty soul, through its restless dreams, may awaken to humility, to empathy, and to the profound responsibility inherent in human freedom. Sleep is not merely rest. It is rehearsal for moral insight, a quiet training of the spirit. Even in darkness, in imagined horrors and imagined suffering, the soul learns, deepens, and inches closer to wisdom. And so, as the night deepens and consciousness softens, remember this: guilt, while heavy, is not merely punishment. It is the vehicle by which understanding enters the soul. The dreams of the guilty are the corridors through which insight walks, slowly, painfully, and ultimately toward the light that can illuminate both conscience and compassion. In this quiet, reflective space, the soul may find its most profound lessons. Pain, Dostoevsky insists, is not an occasional visitor. It is a constant thread woven into the fabric of human life. It returns again and again in forms subtle and immense, shaping thought, emotion, and action. Life, in its most honest portrayal, is a landscape of suffering interlaced with fleeting moments of joy, and it is within this tension that the human soul discovers its capacity for endurance, insight, and transformation. Consider Raskolnikov's lingering anguish. Even after confession, after the first glimmers of redemption through Sonia's love, the echo of pain remains. It is not simply a punishment for past deeds, it is the enduring lesson that life's lessons are rarely singular or final. Suffering returns, like a tide that cannot be stopped, pressing the soul to deeper reflection and richer understanding. Dostoevsky portrays this recurrence not as cruelty, but as the mechanism through which awareness and conscience are refined. The return of pain also carries a paradoxical gift. It reveals the interconnectedness of human experience. The anguish of one is reflected in another. The tears of the innocent touch those who are capable of empathy, and in witnessing suffering, humans are drawn to moral action. Prince Myshkin's encounters with society's cruelty illustrate this principle vividly. He experiences suffering not always as victim, but as witness, absorbing the pain of others and allowing it to transform him. The eternal return of pain then is not meaningless. It is the crucible through which compassion is forged. Dostoevsky suggests that pain is both teacher and companion. It forces recognition of the limits of reason, the fragility of life, and the unpredictable nature of human relationships. Even in moments of despair, the soul is sharpened, made more attentive to the subtle currents of morality and empathy. Suffering's recurrence prevents complacency, discourages arrogance, and reminds us insistently that the world is larger than our desires and expectations. To lie in quiet reflection, imagining the return of pain, is to cultivate vigilance and humility. Every sorrow that comes and goes, every wound and disappointment is not an isolated event, but part of the ongoing dialogue between the individual and existence itself. In this dialogue, one learns patience, endurance, and the recognition that human life in all its unpredictability is a test of moral and emotional strength. Yet Dostoevsky's philosophy of recurring suffering is tempered by the possibility of transcendence. Pain, though inevitable, is never absolute. Through it, human beings may discover empathy, insight, and the capacity for love that surpasses self-interest. Each return is an opportunity, a reminder that the soul's awakening is ongoing, that no lesson is final, and that the journey toward wisdom is continuous, slow, and often arduous. Even in quiet contemplation, one senses the rhythm of this eternal return, a pulse of suffering, reflection, growth, and renewal. It is a cycle that shapes every human life, subtle as a whisper, persistent as the tide, and inexorably instructive. Dostoevsky's insight lies in recognizing the inevitability of this pattern, while showing that within it is the potential for profound moral and spiritual depth. As you drift towards stillness, imagine the recurrence of pain as a gentle, persistent teacher. It may press heavily, it may bruise the heart, but it also awakens the conscience, deepens empathy, and fosters courage. In the quiet of the mind, let this knowledge settle, that suffering is neither punishment nor accident, but the framework through which the human spirit discovers its strength, its capacity for understanding, and the enduring light that arises even in the darkest hours. The eternal return of pain is not to be feared, but understood. It is the pulse of life itself, the silent rhythm through which hearts learn, souls awaken, and humanity is slowly shaped. In its repetition, there is continuity. In its weight, there is education. In its inevitability, there is the opportunity for the deepest wisdom. And in this understanding, one can finally rest, not in ignorance, but in the quiet acceptance of life's profound, inexorable truth. Humiliation, Dostoevsky suggests, is one of life's most paradoxical teachers. It crushes the pride, exposes the weaknesses, and lays bare the self in ways that nothing else can. Yet within this pain, within the bitter taste of shame, lies a peculiar comfort, a path towards self-awareness, humility, and ultimately wisdom. To endure humiliation is to confront the fragile truth of one's own existence, and to recognize the delicate balance between self and society, desire and morality. The underground man embodies this lesson vividly. He thrives in his defiance, in his prideful rejection of society, yet he cannot escape the quiet, relentless sting of his own inadequacy. Every insult, every slight, every imagined humiliation becomes a mirror reflecting the contradictions of his mind. He despises himself and the world simultaneously, yet through this harsh self-reflection, he gains insight into the absurdities and truths of human life. Humiliation, in this sense, is a teacher of honesty, brutal, unforgiving, yet profoundly revealing. Dostoevsky's characters often find that humiliation brings clarity. When Raskolnikov kneels before Sonia, confessing his guilt, he experiences a simultaneous agony and liberation. The act of submission, of being exposed fully in the eyes of another, strips away illusions of pride and self-sufficiency. In this, exposure there is an unspoken lesson. Humility opens the soul to understanding, to empathy, and to connection. The discomfort of shame, though unbearable at times, becomes a conduit for growth. The strange comfort lies in the paradox. Through degradation, the self is refined. By being humbled, we are confronted with the raw truth of our vulnerabilities, desires, and failures. We learn that dignity is not found in pride alone, but in the courage to face ourselves fully, to acknowledge our imperfections, and to continue living despite them. Humiliation, while painful, reminds us of our humanity, our shared weakness, and our need for grace. Consider the subtle ways this manifests in everyday life. Small humiliations, a sharp word, a public failure, the gentle ridicule of peers can provoke deep discomfort. Yet Dostoevsky shows that the willingness to endure these moments without retreat is transformative. The soul learns to disentangle itself from the fragile ego, to witness life's complexities without defensiveness, and to cultivate a steadier, deeper understanding of both self and others. Even in the quiet of reflection, one can sense the lesson. Imagine the sting of shame, the trembling of pride, and the silent confrontation with truth. Allow it to wash over the mind, not as punishment, but as illumination. Each moment of humiliation exposes a corner of the soul that might otherwise remain hidden. Each act of endurance builds resilience, compassion, and moral insight. The very experience that seems destructive is, in Dostoevsky's view, a quiet architect of wisdom. The strange comfort is not immediate, nor is it obvious. It arrives slowly, often unnoticed, as the mind integrates pain and reflection. In the aftermath of shame, a subtle expansion occurs. The ability to empathize with others, the capacity to accept imperfection, and the understanding that life is complex, fragile, and beautifully flawed. Humiliation becomes a teacher, and the soul becomes the pupil. As you drift toward quiet, consider the paradox Dostoevsky offers, that through exposure, embarrassment, and abasement, the human spirit may discover a deeper equilibrium. Humiliation, though sharp and unwelcome, shapes the contours of morality and consciousness. It humbles the mind, softens the heart, and opens the doors of insight. In this recognition, even the sharpest sting of shame can become a quiet comfort, a guide toward understanding and a path to the darkest and most illuminating wisdom.